The Chicago Blackhawks, a dynasty that has finally begun to pull itself from the decline thanks to the drafting of a new king, a new great hope who Blackhawks fans believe will lead this team back to the glory of an age gone by. But for the 2024-25 season, does that mean a return to respectability or a return to the playoffs for the first time since the era of Taves and Kane?
I admit it. Last year was rough.
The 2023-24 Chicago Blackhawks were supposed to be bad, but they were beyond the bad that most people expected, especially with Connor Bedard in the fold. I mean, for God's sakes, this team finished 25 points clear of the Arizona Coyotes in their own division. The 52 standings points that this team amassed was its lowest total since the 2004 lockout, and that includes the lockout and COVID-shortened seasons. While not as consistently bad as the San Jose Sharks, the Blackhawks did have a month-and-a-half period where they only won 2 games and only won consecutive games 3 times all season. They never had a winning streak longer than 2 games. The Blackhawks were also one of the most injured teams in the NHL last year in terms of cap hit of injured players, which is not what you want when you have one of the lowest payrolls in the NHL. For some unknowable reason, Luke Richardson remains the bench boss in Chicago in the 2024-25 season. Despite the fact that he has never coached this team to a season of more than 60 standings points and they actually got worse last year, Richardson is the guy who is going to be trusted with developing the next face of the NHL, Connor Bedard. Now, of course, it's fair to caveat that by saying that Luke Richardson was given 2 teams with absolutely dogshit talent, and or had teams that suffered horrific injury luck. But you know what, dude? At a certain point, you've got to start showing some results on the ice and in the box scores. Chicago simply cannot afford to allow their franchise players' development to stall under an inexperienced head coach. You don't have to make the playoffs this year, but you got to show us that this team is moving forward and not just stalling out.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hand.
You should kill yourself.
Look at that, it's Rookie of the Year Connor Bedard, a man who entered the NHL with more expectations and dick pumping than anybody I've seen since Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby. With that amount of hype and expectation, I thought that once Connor Bedard stepped onto the ice, he was going to be an instant 50-goal, 100-point guy, take the Hawks back to the playoffs, solve the Middle East crisis, and make Star Wars a watchable franchise again. Instead, he got banged up, missed a good portion of the season, and ended the year with 22 goals and 61 points in 68 games, a 74-point pace over an 82-game season. Not shitting your cornflakes too much, Blackhawks fans, but you are aware that Crosby and Ovechkin both put up 100 points in their rookie seasons, and Connor McDavid, who had his season cut short because of injuries as well, was on pace for 85 points over an 82-game season. I'm not whispering the B word or anything, guys, but let's just make sure he can actually score at a point-a-game pace before we anoint him the face of this generation.
Oh, this guy again.
Most of what's returning for the Chicago Blackhawks was either injured or largely ineffective last year. Taylor Hall is obviously the most notable name because even though he was ostensibly on the team, he only played in 10 games for them before suffering a season-ending injury. Seth Jones remains their top defenseman and the one who keeps sending fruit baskets to Darnell Nurse as a thanks for taking the heat off of him as the most overpaid defenseman in the entire NHL. Jason Dickinson, who shared the honor of being the leading goal scorer with Connor Bedard last year, returns as the third-line center, along with developing players like Lucas Reichel and Philip Kurashev. And there's a lot of youth on the back end too, with guys like Kevin Korchinski and Alex Vlasic looking to step up into bigger roles after getting their feet wet and a lot more experience last year. And hey, Corey Perry may be gone, but we still have our resident old guy in Nick Foligno, and Andreas Athanasiou is back after his groin exploded in the middle of last year. And in goal, the Blackhawks bring back Peter Mrazek, who was actually incredibly solid last year, but now in accordance with the law of goaltending, this year he is destined to regress back to a sub-900 save percentage goalie and let in some disgusting soft goals in key games that the Blackhawks could have otherwise won, potentially taking them out of the playoff race.
Oh, Britt is in this?
The Blackhawks were busy bees in the offseason, adding a ton of big-name free agents, including Tyler Bertuzzi, who will slot into the top line alongside Bedard very nicely. And Turbo's back. Teuvo Teravainen returns from his stint in Carolina back to the team that drafted him over 10 years ago. They also added 2 big-name defensemen in Alec Martinez and TJ Brody, who can both theoretically play top 4 minutes. But honestly, those two will be as stout defensively as the TSA is. It's just the illusion of defense that they provide. Less ballyhooed signings like Craig Smith and Ilya Mikheyev will also round out the bottom 6. Neither will be much, but they add some solid locker room presence and grit to the bottom 6. But the big coup for the Blackhawks came in the draft, where they added Artyom Levshinov at pick number 2. He will probably not be playing for the Blackhawks until way later in the season as he finishes out his year at Michigan State. But they also added Sasha Boisvert at pick number 18 and then moved back up into the first round at pick 27 to grab Marek Van Acker. Do I expect to see any of those guys before March at the earliest? No. And honestly, it's more likely that we will see the prospects already in the Blackhawks systems like Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore join the team before those guys.
That's not bad.
I know I was kind of shitting on him a little earlier, but it's undeniable when you watch Connor Bedard play the talent that this kid has. He is just so much fun. He's got an incredible shot, and I do genuinely hope that he stays healthy all year and has that breakout 40-goal, 100-point season that so many were hyping him up as being capable of before he was drafted last year. But on a non-Bedard note, I'm really happy that they brought back Teuvo Teravainen. He was an extremely underrated player for Carolina last year, a guy that I thought that they would never let walk in a million years, and somebody I think the Hurricanes will regret letting go. He may be a bit over-positioned as a first-liner, but he's a legit top 6 guy, and he brings a ton of energy. So I really like that signing, and just generally, I like the makeup of their top 6. I hope Hall has a good rebound year. Tyler Bertuzzi is a good sort of complement to Bedard in terms of their style on the top line, but I think there's also room for guys like Nazar or Moore when they develop and come up to slip into that top 6 and make the Hawks forward core even more deadly.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
Unfortunately, just like the Sharks, I don't think that the Blackhawks are getting much better this year. I think they're still probably a year away, needing their prospects to develop, needing another good draft year, which unfortunately doesn't bode that well for head coach Luke Richardson, a guy who's already starting to hear some calls of being on the hot seat, despite the fact that his team is thin as a razor at the forward position and has the shakiest goaltending of almost any team I've ever seen. The Hawks are probably unlikely to exceed 70 points on the year, maybe scrapping to get to 60 points for the first time in Richardson's tenure. But honestly, if they don't hit at least 70 points this year, I don't know how you can justify keeping him around for a 4th year, unless Bedard bodyguard style throws himself in front of the proverbial bullet coming for Luke Richardson at the end of the year.
Hate the Hawks because they turned my boy Dylan Strome into a stray. Thank God Washington picked him up.